Right, this is a video discussing starting out in creating your own role-playing game and getting it out into the public and all that sort of thing. So I got an email from Robby here, who's creating a game called Enclave. It may be pronounced differently, but that's how I say it. So you've been working now on this for about 4 years, is that right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Sorry. So you've seen my 7DSystem channel and you've seen the DMG info, and um, so give me some idea of firstly why you decided to create a role-playing game, and if you then have questions related to that for me, then you can ask them. Otherwise, we'll just keep going.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. So, it all started when I was a child, but in all seriousness, when I was growing up, my parents were the type that didn't really want my brother and I playing a lot of video games. So, what we did is when we'd see these amazing things at our friends' houses, we'd come back home and try to act them out. And that eventually led to me trying to make kind of my own thing when I was in high school. And by the end of high school, I kind of had a name for it, and I called it Lava because my friends kept calling it LARP, but I read up a little bit on LARP, and I was like, it's not quite that. So I tried to give it its own name. And then in college, I made Enclave, a lava take on a tabletop RPG, as I would eventually learn it was. It mostly was born out of my love of Diablo 2, I would say. I love that game. And so Enclave was kind of like the lava iteration of Diablo 2, and that ended up looking a lot like a tabletop RPG.
Okay, cool. So you didn't have any kind of exposure to Dungeons and Dragons and that kind of thing. It was basically it evolved naturally out of your own, ideas and wanting to create something computer game-ish that, but you had little exposure to that other than through friends and that sort of thing. Is that right?
That's pretty much exactly right. I knew Dungeons and Dragons existed, but I had no concept of what it was until when I made Enclave, people started saying, this is a lot like D&D, and I love playing D&D, and I love playing Enclave. And I was like, oh, wow, tell me about this. So it's kind of a case of convergent evolution. I came to a similar thing from a different position.
Yeah, that's very interesting because a lot of the times my personal view of D&D is it kind of inserts its DNA into other games.
Oh, like a virus.
So, like a virus, exactly. It's like almost like the Borg of the tabletop role-playing universe, where it just assimilates. You've got D&D in everything, so you've always got the same kind of. You've got these the level structure. You're going from level 1 to 20. You've got hit points, and you've got classes, and all this kind of thing. So it's very interesting to. So every game is kind of D&D-ish in a way. And obviously, there are some games that are a reaction to that. 7DSystem is kind of a reaction to that. But I'm interested to hear how Enclave... I mean, I assume you've seen D&D now? You've played D&D?
I have yet to play it, actually.
Okay, all
But
right.
I've seen gameplay videos. I made a
Okay.
point of looking them up.
Okay. So you've been exposed to it from a periphery, so you haven't actually utilized the rules in an actual game itself. Okay. So
Mhm.
that's very interesting because a lot of the times when you talk to a game designer or something, they've obviously heavily played D&D and then they model it on that. So this is very interesting for me because I'm now speaking to someone who has no exposure other than a peripheral exposure. So how can you tell me how you evolved the rules and like if you could explain the core of what the game actually is?
Absolutely. I was just giggling, thinking of myself as like one of those uncontacted tribes in the Amazon or something that like some anthropologist finds like, oh my God, these people.
Who is this
So,
guy?
so here's how I describe Enclave. Since it evolved from these games that were played by me trying to act out video games, Enclave has a very strong foundation in non-theatrical acting, is the way I would put it. So in Dungeons and Dragons terms, from what I have researched, I guess, it has a very heavy emphasis on role play. And I'd say the main difference in between Enclave and D&D, just on face value, is we don't use dice, and but we still have stats and like hard mechanics, but we describe these mechanics and these stats in like descriptive language, so that it allows them to be like concrete, like you know what's stronger or weaker than something else, but it still gives enough flexibility for a facilitator, which I call lava facilitators conduits. I didn't know about the term GM, so conduit was just kind of the name that stuck with me. So it allows conduits to each kind of have their own style and not break game flow to like mince details, is the way I would put it. Does that make sense?
So there is still someone who kind of directs the game, and
Yes.
then you have the players are actors in this sort of scenario, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So,
but there's no hard and fast, okay, you're a 15 and you need a 20 to
exactly right.
Okay. All right. So I kind of loosely understand the mechanics. So, I mean, there are games out there that are more narrative based. So they still use dice and that sort of thing. Some games that use cards. One uses a Jenga tower, which is very interesting.
Wow.
So that's called Dread. And so that is all about, you want to perform an action, you pull one of the little wooden blocks out of the Jenga tower, and slowly, like, things become more and more and more difficult, and so the dread piles on. So it's a very interesting mechanic, because this can topple at any time, and that's it, you all die, sort of deal.
That sounds like the sort of game you play at 3 a.m.
That's right. Because you can go home at any moment. So it's very interesting to find out about how this sort of thing evolved outside of this, D&D heavily saturated world. And I think, so mechanically, it's just, I would assume someone says, well, I want to do this, or are they physically acting something out, or is it still sitting around a table?
Sure. So what we try to do in Enclave is reward effort. I'd say, like, at the core, that's how I try to describe it, is when because I've trained a few conduits how to conduit for Enclave, how to host for Enclave.
Yep.
And one of the things I try to impress is I will rarely say you did something wrong, like you let a player get away with something, if the player earned it. And for us, what that means is it's the conduit's job to describe what's going on in the world of the game, and whenever a player asks for details, you give them those details, stats permitting, and usually they do. But additionally, when a conduit's job is to also resolve actions within the game, what you do is, say a player is trying to do a task that maybe is kind of on the periphery of their stats, like as someone who's above average in terms of strength, the might stat in Enclave terms, is trying to do something like brace a door. What we would ask you to do as a conduit is then say, all right, I want details on how you're bracing this door. How are you positioning your body? What's going through your mind? And the more the person, they might get to their feet and vaguely show what they're doing. They might just describe. They might speak in character as their character, gritting their teeth to the teammates, being like, go on, guys, get through that back door. I'll hold as much as I... And so, you know what I mean? The more you really, like, commit to the action, the more detail you give, assuming your stats can vaguely work with it, we usually let you do it. And that's kind of this spirit of Enclave, is really to kind of embrace the narrative, I would say is the word I would use, and to really prioritize these cool storytelling moments where someone pulls off something that they're not sure they can pull off, and they know they did it because they described it really well.
So it's the conduit's job to determine whether this person succeeds, and to the level at which they succeed. Okay.
Exactly right.
All right. So you're taking, which is different from D&D, because what a game master traditionally in a game will set a difficulty, and then the player will roll a dice or perform an action that then is out of what you would term the conduit's hands, and then the player will then feed back and say, I have succeeded, or I have failed, or get over, or whatever. So it's interesting that the dynamic has shifted there. So the decision becomes one of adjudication, on your part as the conduit, whereas D&D, the dice adjudicate the success, which obviously having no dice in Enclave, you as the conduit are rewarding the character, so to speak. Now, is it always been that way, or is it sometimes that that was like collective, the players would all decide, or was it always the conduit would decide whether it was a success or a failure?
It's actually been that way from the beginning, even with the games I made in high school, where I would make these games and I would host them, and it would just be, yeah, Robby Games. Let's go to Robby Games. So I guess that's how I kind of evolved like that, I guess, adjudicating style, as you accurately described. What's the tricky part is, since that's a lot of power to give to someone. And what we try to do is we try to impress upon conduits that you're trying to get people to like commit, and you're trying to get people to put effort into the game, but you also need to go into it not only from an unbiased perspective, but from like a perspective where you want them to succeed. You want the story to be great and interesting and good. And so it's kind of been this juggling act of making sure that the player is putting in like, I guess, like putting into the game, but also doesn't feel like that's the only way they can succeed. I've had plenty of players who come to Enclave and they're not really super comfortable going super in depth, and they're not really much interested in the acting. And what they do is they really get into kind of that mechanical side, and they say, all right, well, I know for a fact kind of like what the general levels of power, what the general cutoff points are. I'm going to really make sure that I know those well. And when I pull off my abilities, I know that I don't have to go into an area I'm uncomfortable with in order to be pretty sure they're going to succeed. Because one of the things we emphasize is if a conduit makes a call that a player's like, wait a sec, I think they missed something. I think they didn't take something into account. You are encouraged as a player to say, real quick, before we move on, just a quick thing, what about this? And if the conduit says, ooh, I forgot about that, then that's good, and you just keep moving on. If the conduit says, taking that into account, and the call still stands, the player goes, right, awesome. So it's kind of like a back and forth where the conduit at the end of the day is the one making the game go, but it's because they're really trying to see the players succeed. I hope I've put that into good terms, I guess.
Yeah, it makes sense. So once players, let's say you're playing through the session, do you have multiple session arcs, or is it everything is self-contained in one story in one game session?
Well, that's one of the things that turned out to be really great about Enclave, and one of the reasons I think it became the game that kind of Lava was known for within my playgroup after that point, is because it could be either. You can make a character, and you can play them just once in like a single contained session. Sessions can be anywhere from like an hour to we've done 12 hours before, and that was pretty intense. But or what you can do is you can play the same character many, many, many times. We've had single characters who've been played. We had one character who was played for 98 sessions, 98 different individual start to finish sessions. And then they died on the 99th, and it was heartbreaking. Like, everyone was in mourning over this beloved character. But so that way people can like come and play once or twice and be like, yeah, that was fun. Or people can try a new character and be like, I'm not really feeling it. Or people can be like, I love this character, I'm going to play them endlessly. And they can do that.
Well, that's also what I tried to do with 7DSystem, is make the game porous, so you can have a new player, an experienced player, and a new character and an old character all in the game at the same time. And D&D, one of my problems with D&D is you can't do that. You can't bring in someone and they start the character from dot and then build them up. Usually, if the whole party are all around the same level and a new person comes in, they have to be like jumped up to that level in order to continue to play, because of the mechanics of the way that it works. Whereas a system like what you're describing, you don't necessarily need that, because you can have characters come in and out even in the middle of the game, and you wouldn't have a problem with integrating them. So when a character's progressing, let's say it's played in 96 sessions, is it like in a movie where it's kind of the character kind of remains the same the whole time, and there's growth in terms of their personality and what they feel and all these kind of things? Or is it actually they get stronger, they get faster, they get, more powerful, etc.?
Sure. So in Enclave, we do have a leveling system. Pretty simple 1 to 10 leveling system. It's quite hard to get to level 10. On average, it takes people about 50 sessions to get to level 10. I like giving these like high caps, so when someone hits it, it's really special, you know? But we also have, every time you go on a mission, which is the name of an Enclave session, you're rewarded at the end not only with experience to level up, nice and standard, you're also rewarded with loot, which is another nice little standard thing that you can expect. And it turns out that if you have a very high level character, most of their power comes from their loot, because their loot just ends up being so strong because they just pile on cool thing after cool thing. And a lot of people really like that in my own play group. They play Enclave for the loot, to see what crazy stuff they can build up. But in addition to all that, one of the things I love most about Enclave, and I like to try to prioritize, is character development. And is because we really value role play. And in fact, in Enclave, characters have personalities that are generated along with the character when they're created. The degree to which you play that personality is up to you. Like, no one's going to say, oh, you can't play the game because you didn't play the personality well. But we encourage it because it's for us, it's a lot more interesting. It makes the game a lot more fun. And to see how characters grow and change as they're played can range from like, oh wow, you can still see him, it's so wonderful and sweet, to wow, this is a completely different person and I love it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
So I'm just thinking about it from a mechanical perspective, because obviously I have not seen it, run it, or my experience of just exactly what you're talking about now is my experience of it. So so you've got levels 1 through 10, and when you're gaining experience, does the experience kind of tack onto what you've been doing, or do you kind of arbitrarily place it into what you prefer to build up? So for instance, you do a lot of jumping in this session, you get a bunch of experience, so you decide to put that into using handguns or something. So how does that work? Do you progress in what you do, or do you progress in what you feel you want your character to be able to do future on?
In this case, it's mostly the latter with a touch of the former. I don't want to go too. Maybe if you're interested in hearing a little bit about the world building of the game, I'll get into that if you want. But to just stick with the question you asked for now, the way that we have it is when you level up, you can actually distribute stats as you wish. It doesn't necessarily have to correlate with what your character was doing on that given mission. However, sometimes as mission rewards, you can receive stat training that is always directly pertinent to something you did on that mission. We've generally found in the time that we've hosted for our group that stat training is insanely powerful. And so we try to limit how often we give it because it's very, very good. But in terms of just raw experience gain, because we use like a percent system, get to 100%, you level up, and then it resets to 0. How we do it is, it's based on how long and arduous the mission was, with bumps and knocks. And this bump and knock system is, if you really committed to your character, if you played like a god, then you can get some bumps to get a little bit of extra experience, which is part of the way that we really try to incentivize roleplay. On the other hand, if, for example, you made life really difficult for everyone else who was playing, then if the conduit can provide like a good example of, look, when you did this, it really wasn't okay. It kind of broke like a lot of other people's experience, and we really didn't appreciate it. The way that you can choose to handle that, if you so wish, is to have a little bit less experience if you feel like the person might do it again. But of course, that is up to the discretion of the entire play group.
Okay. No, I mean, that makes sense to me. Have you seen Hankrin Fernane on Runehammer, the YouTube channel?
I have.
Okay. So you're exposed to ICRPG. You have an understanding of what that is?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So he has taken a similar kind of concept where he's almost ripped out experience altogether and just put loot as the main way of progressing your character. which is also another very interesting way to separate it. And I can see from what you're describing the kind of computer game influence on what you're doing. What's different with 7DSystem is that it is your character builds based on what your character does. So you walk around all day lifting up heavy rocks, you're going to get really strong and really good at lifting rocks, but you are not going to be able to say, I'm now powerful at magic. So, you know, that's, I mean, in a very basic way, that's how mine differs from some of the other ones that have the sort of D&D DNA. I mean, one of the other things is I've completely removed levels. So there's no, this is a level 6 guy, this is a level 10 guy, this is a level 1 guy. And the way the mechanics work help to balance the game so that if you've got characters of different levels of ability and power with lower skilled characters, they can still work together, and the opportunities are still the same. The lower character who doesn't have as much experience will still be able to perform any task, but at a greater difficulty, whereas the more experienced person can perform any task at a reduced difficulty based purely on the fact that they have more experience in actually doing that thing. So
absolutely,
I try to bring some of the real world kind of mechanics of, you know, if you go to a new job and you've never done, you might have some book learning experience on how to do the job. And then you hit a guy who's been doing it for 20 years and he just sort of blows your mind in 5 minutes. It's like, holy crap, you know, this is completely different to what I thought. But spending a day with that guy, you learn so much that you advance very quickly in your knowledge and understanding of that particular task you've been employed to do. So what tends to happen in 7DSystem is you front load the experience. So your character becomes very good very quickly. So as you jump up in ranks, if you were to take it in D&D terms, normally in D&D you've got a score out of 20, and each time you level you get an extra 1, which is like a 5% jump. Whereas in 7DSystem, if you were to be equivalent, you would get a 25 or 30% jump on the first rank. And then it begins to slow down. So the next one you'll only get 20, the next one you'll only get 15, the next one you'll get 12, 10, and you have, in economic terms, you have a diminishing marginal return. So the more you're doing something, the more you do the job over 20 years, the less you actually learn about it. You've kind of gained most of your experience on how to do it in the first section of your character. And so although you will learn new things and you will gain experience, you won't gain them as quickly as you did in the beginning, and the bonuses to you won't be as great. So I try to mimic that in the way that the mechanics of the game actually functions. So it's always, as I said, it's always interesting to hear how other people do it and why they do it and that sort of thing. And, you know, it's interesting that you have the level structure, and I think part of that is because obviously with computer games, those were exposed to D&D, so you've still got the little trail of DNA that kind of like swims through. I was
just thinking about that, actually.
So, you know, it kind of still gets in there. I mean, obviously, you know, my game is heavily influenced by D&D as well, and which is good, because obviously when people are coming to it, they're going to compare it to Dungeons and Dragons. They're going to compare it to Pathfinder and all these other sort of dominant games in the industry. So you kind of have to couch it with that expectation that, you know, the core thing that people are going to want is fantasy, and the core thing they're going to want is like levels. There's got to be some kind of progression that happens. And the most popular games tend to be the ones that have that sort of injection of the D&D style mechanic in them. So I've tried to react against that and maintain some of what that has, but to be quite different in the way that the game functions. And I can see that that's what's happening with Enclave as well. Although you didn't have the exposure to it, you still have that little pieces of it that are coming through, and that's very, very interesting.
If I may say so, by the way, I actually vastly prefer your system. It's a lot more holistic, and I really like that sort of thing. But by now, it's just kind of become hardwired into
Oh,
Enclave at the
sure.
very least.
Sure.
So much so that when I actually was like, wow, people really like my game, I should actually figure out the world building for it, shouldn't I? I went out of my way to be like, all right, wow, that actually really makes sense. Let's put why people level in this way into the
Hmm.
world building to help people kind of rationalize, like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But if I were going to be making like a slightly different looking game that wasn't very cleanly rooted in
Yeah.
things like Diablo and these old loves, I do think I would go with more of a train what you use system.
I would say, look, originally in D&D, when you leveled, the levels had names. Like you were an apprentice, and then you were,
Oh,
and you went up 2 levels, and you were like a trainee, and then I can't remember exactly what they were. I'm sure someone's going to comment in the comment section or the argument section below. And so levels would have names, and I really liked that you would start out as like, you'd have no knowledge, you'd become an apprentice, you would, etc., etc., and then you'd become a grand master at like level 20, super godlike grand master or whatever. Um, and I think for something like Enclave, because you don't have dice to actually change the levels from I'm a level 10 guy, because that's very arbitrary and doesn't really, I would basically switch the levels to actual labels. So, you're an initiate, a trainee, unskilled or whatever. So, you can then use that language in the game. So, okay, when you come across a skilled bad guy or a masterful bad guy, the language kind of gives you an idea of what you're encountering. And so you can actually insert that language into the game as when you're describing you've got to go and find this masterful thief who's been who's stealing things from the realm. Okay, rather than saying you've got to go and find this level 7 thief guy. I mean, it's an arbitrary thing that you need to kind of switch in, especially if you're going to be super narrative, because yours sounds like it's very story driven, very much up to the player's ability to use their mental faculties to solve problems,
exactly.
whereas D&D is very much the dice solve the problems rather than the player. And you get into it's hardcore D&D players. A lot of them, they don't like puzzles in the game, and part of the reason is that because they want to use their characters to solve the thing because they've been trained to do it. They want to use their characters to solve the puzzle. They don't want to have to sit and actually think, okay, I've got this mathematical formula I've got to equate for, and I have no idea what's going on. I just want to roll the dice, you know. So yours is more cerebral and actually is using the faculties of the player to push the narrative forward. And I like that because 7DSystem's combat mechanic is very much like that. It's not, okay, I've got a 16, I just need to roll higher than that and I hit the guy, which is, that's the D&D way of doing it. With mine, it's like, you may be very good at fighting, but if you're just standing in front of the guy and you lift your sword and you want to hit him, the guys go, hey, I don't want to don't you hit me, I'm going to step back and move back. That's going to be a problem. And so it's difficult to hit the guy, right? Because he's going to react to what you're doing. Whereas if you're standing behind him and he doesn't know you're there, it's going to be a lot easier. And it doesn't matter whether you're skilled or masterful or untrained, that situation is going to be the same for both. But if you're better with your weapon and you're just standing in front of the guy, you may have a lot more weapon finesse and it would be easier for you to hit him even though he's backing away. But if you're unskilled, it's going to be really hard because you don't know how to use the axe that you're carrying.
Sure.
And so that's how the 7DSystem mechanics kind of work, which is, I think, probably a little bit in line with your way of thinking. It's like,
Absolutely.
well, would you really be able to just walk up to the guy and hack him in half with an axe? Surely he would want to step out of the way or back away at the very least.
Whoa, we're cool, man. We're cool, please.
That's right. So, as you said, with a conduit will actually, they'll make a decision and say, well, I don't think the goblin will just want to stand there and be hacked to death. He'd probably want to jump over the bar and hide under the counter sort of thing. you know, he wants to basically steal your gold and run away. He doesn't want to wait there to have his head chopped off. You know, which is very un-D&D. Obviously, there are people who play D&D who play it more this way, and they've changed the mechanics. But you know, traditional vanilla D&D is very much, okay, here's what you need, you roll, you beat that, you hit the guy. And that's why it translates so well into computer games, because the guy's in front of you, you click a button, you swing at him, do you hit or miss? Yes, boom, he loses 5 points.
Got him.
That's right. So, speaking about losing 5 points, so I assume there's some kind of injury system in Enclave.
Can I backtrack for a moment? Because
Sure.
I kept like getting thoughts while you were talking. Shoot, where was I going to start? Okay, so firstly, I cracked up when you mentioned putting puzzles into Dungeons and Dragons, because it reminded me of one of the conduits I trained was playing for the same group a few times in a row. And we have a system where on missions, we design missions on the spot. When I publish Enclave, I'm hoping to have a few pre-constructed things, because from what I understand, people prefer that. But I would really like to share with people my method for making missions on the spot. And part of it is through player input. We get player input. And through what are called focus words, which are words or phrases that we use as inspiration. And this guy I trained, this good friend of mine, got the word door puzzle on 4 missions in a row and just got sick of it and started putting door puzzles completely out of nowhere. They didn't make any sense in the context of the missions, but he got so fed up with people giving him door puzzle as a focus word, just made a mission that was nothing but door puzzles. And to this day, he is still associated with door puzzles. But the other thing I wanted to mention was part of the thing that really drew me to the 7DSystem was the similarity to Enclave. I was looking through, and I had been looking at D&D gameplay and being like, oh yeah, I can see why people really like this. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And then I found your stuff, and I'm like, this is like a nice bridge between Enclave and D&D with some stuff entirely its own. And the first video of yours I watched was one titled The Choice, I believe. Yep. And do you know that video off the top of your head? Yeah. That video, I was like, aha. That is very similar to what I try to do with Enclave in general. But of course, that's a little bit off topic because it doesn't entirely pertain to stats. So to answer your question about health, we have in Enclave the 12 stats and the 4.5 resources. Now 5, but we joke about it. And the 4 or 5 resources of Enclave are health, magical energy, stamina, morale, and focus. Now, you really don't have to worry about them too much unless you're actively using them, is the way we describe it. And we try to think about them as generalized pools of what makes sense. So if you've just got your arm lopped off, you've obviously lost some health, but the biggest problem with that is you don't have your arm. You won't die for a little bit after getting your arm cut off. You have a few minutes in you, and if you can get someone to patch you up, then you probably have an hour. But not having your arm is debilitating. And that's what we try to do, is have the health system as like for a conduit or for a player. If a player says, what's my health like? And a conduit's like, well, you're not doing great right now, probably at like 60%. These magical blasts are really taking a toll on you. It's a good way of being like, yeah, it's about that. You're feeling it, because just all that's important is the benchmarks. What's the point at which my character is so weak and crippled and sick they can barely move? What's the point where they die? If I'm spending energy to use my spells and abilities, what's the point where I'm like, wow, my soul hurts from all the magic I'm using? What's the point at which I'm out of energy, and instead of using energy, I use my health instead of energy, and it hurts so badly it knocks me out instantly? So that's what we try to use, is these broad pools that you can set clean benchmarks in, with the 2 trickiest ones being morale and focus. And in the rule set I'm hoping to release, it's the sort of thing where I want to mention that they're good to bear in mind, but I don't want to linger too long on them, so people don't feel like you really have to have, you need to know exactly what your morale is like. You need to know exactly what no, it's more like what are good benchmarks to know? When is my character utterly miserable and defeated? When is my character so overloaded with information they can't notice the gorilla. Do you know that famous video of the ball passes and the gorilla that walks through the middle?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. What's the benchmark where you don't
Yeah.
notice the gorilla? So I hope that answers your question. That's how we treat health and similar resources in Enclave, where we have them as these general pools for knowing what benchmarks are what, and also we treat bodily injuries like having your arm cut off as separate from health. Obviously, the two are related. You'll lose health if you get your arm cut off, but they are different problems, is the way I would put it.
Okay. No, I mean that's very interesting. You know, it's similar to some extent to what I do, but you know, obviously everything is slightly different or very different. And obviously they have to fit together mechanically, which is very important. So, you know, one of the aspects of the email that you originally sent me is that you want to put this game out there and you want to get it in front of people. And I mean, you seem quite comfortable on camera. Have you got anything on YouTube yet, or?
Well, I tried streaming on Twitch for a little bit, but when you just like jump onto Twitch, it's kind of hard to like get people to tune in. So I have a few full-length missions from Twitch from like a year and a half ago, and they're all right. Like they're kind of like, you gotta be patient with them. But there's one that's actually hilarious. It's not even a long one, but I really enjoyed the heck out of it. But I am thinking about doing more YouTube content. In fact, that was one of the big questions I had for you, was about using YouTube as a platform through which to like advertise and broadcast and share more details on a new game system as well as a new game.
Yeah. Well, for me, and this will probably speak true to a lot of small publishers, it's very important that you have a community around what you're doing. It's very easy to sell a game to a community of people that know you and know what you're about and know what you're doing than to sell your game to people who have no idea who you are. They got no way to research who you are. They got no idea to find out why certain things are the way they are. So my idea, obviously with 7DSystem, I've got the DMG Info, which is a large channel. I run about 15 YouTube channels, but only these two are the ones that I'm actually on. Well, there's Drawing Worlds as well, but I run for a lot of different businesses and things like that. And the key thing for it is always building a community around your offering. The important thing there is that you are giving them the experience and you're giving them the education of what this is. So, for instance, the choice video that you saw. So one of my things in 7DSystem is that it's very much about how to actually put together a story, because there are thousands of tabletop role-playing games, and I can probably only count on one hand the number of games that actually say, this is how you structure a story.
Yes.
Which, to me, I have a master's degree in narrative film, and my thesis was on universal narrative structure. So, you know, I've been in doing this for a long time. And, you know, it surprised me that, you know, even big-name products like D&D, there's lots of things you can have, these elements and these elements and these elements, but there's no way to tie them all together. There's no start here, then do this, then do this, then do this. I mean, probably one of the best examples of one that does do it is ICRPG, where there's this is where you start, this is when you do this is when you have the monster, this is when you do these things. And that's why Hanker and I actually, I mean, I've played with him. He's played 7DSystem. I haven't played ICRPG, but I've read all the materials for it. But our sort of thinking on games aligns there, because, you know, it's very important that, because if you don't have a good story, it doesn't matter how good the mechanics are.
Exactly.
You're going to lose people. They're just going to go, this is boring. You know, we just keep fighting the same monsters over and over and over again. It's just a matter of just attrition. And there's so you're not like going from one thing to another, and there's a that you've got to have that sort of bridge between the different aspects and parts of the story. And so part of my YouTube channel was to say, well, this is how you actually do a role-playing game story. And that's the video you got on, is video 2, because the first one is the hook. How do you hook them into something? And then they've got to make a choice. Do they actually want to do this? So you've got to make the hook enticing enough that they're going to make the right choice. And the choice is, balanced by 3 things, whether it's going to be a moral choice or a duty choice, or a compensation sort of choice. There's those sort of 3 things, and if you play on those, it's the moral thing to do, it's your duty to do it, or there's a hell of a lot of money involved. It doesn't have to be a hell of a lot of money, just the perception that there's a lot of money involved. Those are the 3 things you can use to create that choice, because most people will just go, I don't think we really want to do this. There's going to be that sort of not want to do it, but it has to be tantalizing enough to drive the story forward. So that's the video that you saw, the choice. And then obviously it moves on to, they've got to meet the mentor, they've got to meet Obi-Wan, they've got to learn how to use the lightsaber, they've got to then go, they've got to go into the dark cave and then discover the monsters and the traps.
Yep. What's that circle, the 12-step circle? Sorry to interrupt you.
It's the hero's journey. It's basically the hero's journey, yeah. I've basically taken that concept and just reworked it from a role-playing game perspective. But there's more to it in that, in terms of scenes. Like when you're presenting a scene, you set the scene in such a way that the players set objectives for their characters. So you have to, in your description of the scene, a very succinct, short description of the scene, you walk into a dark room and you see a candle burning dimly on a table piled with papers. So your first reaction is, okay, there's a table and there's a pile of papers, right? So you're going to set some kind of goal, and it's most likely going to be what's on those papers, what's at this table. You're going to investigate this thing you've kind of highlighted. In the corner, you notice 2 glowing eyes sort of open up as you approach the table. So now it's like you've now introduced a new, you've got to figure out, is this a threat? Is this a friend? And so you've set goals, and you as the director of this thing, you kind of can just, it can go in any direction. You allow the players to kind of flow into that and then make decisions. And then they're going to achieve their goal, but not at a super satisfactory level. It's kind of, there's always going to be, you can always get to 99% because you can never get to 100, right? It's always going to be the little thing that goes wrong, and that's, and that's where the drama starts to happen. There's always something, the guy, he sneaks up and he's about to stab the guy in the back and he steps on a squeaky floorboard or something. There's just like, it just changes the dynamic just a little bit. And those are the kind of things that you don't see in role-playing game books. You don't see these in rule books. Fleshing out the way of actually pushing and driving the game forward so that the players feel engaged and you want to play it when the session ends. They go, oh, it's finished. Damn! Now I've got to wait a whole week. It's that sort of Netflix effect. You want to binge watch. You want to do the 12-hour session. You don't want to stop. And that's key. And once it's well structured, they won't want to stop. But you need that natural end, because you need to 4 hours have rolled around. People are getting hungry. They're getting tired. You've got to kind of have that natural end to it. You need that sort of, you get the peak and then it naturally flows down. So you need that kind of bookend to a session that you can then say, okay, well, this is great. We're all good. We managed to get out of the cave to tell another tale, and then you move on to the next one. And so I can see a lot of that in what you're describing about Enclave. I can see that there's a lot of that kind of mechanics can evolve from what you've been describing about the game. And that's really why I think you like 7DSystem, is because that's a big part of the game itself. Is it's all these little things have been kind of piled up to facilitate this kind of gameplay.
Absolutely, hit the nail on the head. Can I share a story?
Sure.
It's exactly about what you're talking about. Um, First day of high school, I go up to my friend Thomas and I say, who had played a few of my lava games before, and I say, "Hey Thomas, I got this new game. Do you want to try it?" And he goes, "Yeah, I got nothing else to do." We come back to my house, and it's a game called Lifetime. It was what I call my first good game.
Yeah.
And Lifetime was pretty much lava, but you're just living a fantasy book. You just do whatever. It was pretty much just a living simulator in a fantasy world.
Yeah.
And his first day, he's this rat person in this like the bottom of a dingy cavern, kicked around by everyone bigger than him, has to participate in these life-threatening hunts every single day. And his first day, what he does is he challenges the chieftain of the tribe, the biggest, nastiest one, and he gets destroyed. He gets thrashed. And we talk through the whole scene, and he just wasn't strong enough. And the chieftain kind of looms over him, and he goes, "You know what? I like you. You got guts. How would you like to be a second in command?" And Thomas says, "Yeah." And the chieftain makes him do a tail tie, their equivalent of a handshake, right?
Yeah.
And then he says, "If you need me, I'll be in my burrow." And he turns around, and I feel Thomas's hand in my back as I'm acting this out. And Thomas says, "I stab him in the back." And at that moment, in my mind, I made this decision. I was like, oh, well, I didn't plan that. And at that moment, I was like, he goes down immediately, poison coursing through his veins. And then Thomas turns around to the rest of the tribe and goes, "If you need me, I'll be in my burrow." Oh. And that was kind of the moment that I say lava was born.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's about giving up control of the world you make.
Yeah.
When I teach my conduits how to design a mission, I say 10% planning, 90% improv. Because you should have an idea of the mission statement. You should have a very clear mission statement that your group can accept or turn down, which is, of course, part of the choice. They're like, all right, is this mission worth it to me? Then you make sure that they have a moment in character to meet each other before the mission so that they can discuss strategy or like riff off each other. And then you have a very clear introduction sequence. You make sure you know what the threats and allies could be. You know where like you could end the mission. You know some routes they could take, but other than that, you leave everything up in the air, everything. And you just go with it as you go along, and you can make some beautiful things. And I credit that backstab as the birth of this idea, because I swear I was in awe of how cool it was. Little 14-year-old Rob, string bean 14-year-old Rob was like, "I can't believe he did that. That was the coolest thing I've ever seen." And so,
that was cool. Yeah,
and that's conduiting. Yeah, no, that's what you're doing.
And it's like when you're sitting in a movie and it's just you can feel when something's going to be good. You know, it's like I saw The Matrix, I think 2 weeks before it actually came out, because I was in a test screening in South Africa. Because they used to do a lot of test screenings there. And so there hadn't been any kind of marketing on it, and there hadn't been any of this. So I was going in, I knew this was something about a guy in a computer. That was about, all I knew about it. And so we went into this test screening. And, you know how The Matrix starts. I assume you've seen it, right?
I saw it when I was 17, yeah.
Yeah. And so, this is all right, And then all of a sudden he wakes up in this like glutinous blob, and he's like got these cables and shit in his head. I'm like, holy shit, we've just turned the corner. And that to me is exactly what you wanted. You've subverted expectation. The Matrix has you, etc., etc. And then it just gets, they kind of compound the coolness. You can just download jiu-jitsu into your brain. I mean, everything a young kid is like, oh, especially a computer nerd like me. It's like, oh yeah, well, it's like, give me a chopper, we're in. Which is exactly how computer games work. And it's just, that is just, for me, that was fabulous. And those kind of narrative things that you can do make a massive difference to your game. And I think that's what's vital in terms of, I think the biggest selling point for 7D System will be the fact that it tells you how to tell a story. And to me, it's
Absolutely.
like, even if you don't want to play the game, you will buy the book so that when you're playing D&D, you have, this is, okay, well, here's it's because it's quite a big section of the rule book is how to tell the story. And it comes before combat, it comes before character creation, it comes before all those things. This is how you tell the story. And to me, that's like the vital thing, is because if you watch some of my demo, I don't know if you've seen them, but I've got demo games that I've got on the channel, and obviously each one, I try to do a different genre each time, and I try to have different people each time. My Patreon's playing some of them. And what a lot of people don't know is that most of those people, especially like the celebrity games, like the Tilvertonians, and the game I just played with Juice and his wife and two other people, those games, they had no idea about the mechanics 15 minutes before we started. So they hadn't read the rules, they hadn't done any of these things. You kind of just jump in, and it makes sense as you go. You ask, there's a couple of kind of rule questions that people ask, like, how do I do this? That makes sense. I don't have to ask this question again. And I get the sense that Enclave will be a lot like that, because you it kind of makes sense just in talking about it. I don't think you'd take more than about 15 to 20 minutes to train a new person to play the game. It's kind of like, you can do this, you can ask this, and this is what we're expecting from you. Bang. Obviously, with 7D System, there's actual mechanic. These are the dice. If you've never used dice before, it'll probably take a little bit longer to explain it. I'm trying to convince my mother to play, because she is so anti everything, like with role playing. It's like, oh, I would never want to do that. It's like, I get her to play, and then, so show that it can literally teach someone who has absolutely no desire to play, like she will do it. And she'll probably play once and never play again, but it would be great if she played and then, she enjoyed it and wished to play again, because that's the ultimate game for me, is the desire to play a second time or a third time, fourth time, etc. So
I'm very lucky to have a very supportive mother who is fluent in Enclave. When we would have players over, she'd like, oh yeah, how's the game going? And they'd be like, well, we're on this really tough. She'd be like, oh yeah, definitely. Make sure you get a healer to check that out. Yeah, right. But she never played. She just knew the game from hearing about it. So,
well, my mom pushed me into D&D because a friend of hers, whose son was someone who had got all the scholarships to all the best schools and universities and so on and so forth, he played D&D. So mom was like, yeah, this must be good for him,
Wow.
It's like, so she was like, yeah, you should play this D&D game. And then when a friend of mine said, would you like to play D&D? I'm like, yeah, let's do it. My mom says it's fine.
Nice story.
I was like 12 or something. I was like, why not? Whereas a lot of people, especially in America, where there's a heavy sort of, especially in the 80s, there was a heavy sort of religious, this is a no-go zone. A lot of people were kind of like, it was a taboo thing, and it was, your parents you didn't want to be found out that you played these, and that kind of stigma carried through until very recently. And now that D&D 5th edition has exploded, I mean, there are more new players now than there were actually old players. I think the game has basically doubled in size in the last 5 years, or 4 years since 5th edition started. Even Hasbro has mentioned that Wizards of the Coast has had their best year on record for Dungeons and Dragons. It's actually made a point of telling their shareholders that this is, we're going to focus on this now, which means they're going to plow more money into it, which means you're going to see a lot more about it. So this segment of the market is only going to get bigger. And people want to try different things. You look at board games, for instance. We're in the golden age of board games now. There's got to be 100,000 different board games available at this point. And so, tabletop role-playing, there are thousands of games, but I think it's just going to get bigger, and the market is going to become like Steam for computer games. It's going to be extremely competitive. And where you're going to shine is giving people tools to use, not just in one game, but in multiple games. So that's why I like doing these sort of talks, because, to find out what you're doing, and what how your game differs to mine, and where there's similarities, and because it's always interesting to find out why someone creates a game. Because Dave from Nerdarchy, he's always said, why create a role-playing game? There's thousands out there. You can just pick a game that does the thing that you want to do, which is fine as a statement, but I don't agree with him, because if I go to a movie, I'm going to see Mission Impossible, the new one, this evening, right? I go to that movie, I think, this is wow, I want to go home and play Mission Impossible. By the time I order the books and they arrive a few days later, and then I've got to read the books, we're 1 or 2 weeks in, the desire to play Mission Impossible has kind of disappeared. Whereas if you've got something like Enclave or 7DSystem, which is more a generic kind of system that kind of overrides or overarcs, sort of it. I prefer to call 7DSystem a physics engine rather than a role-playing system.
That's great.
Because that's what it is. It's basically a system. You can basically play anything in it. And so you come home from the movie and you go and you see it with your friends or whoever. You come home from the movie and you go, right, let's play Mission Impossible. Or let's play Lord of the Rings. Or you go and you see a Jane Austen movie and you go, right, let's go and do Jane Austen. Why not? If that's what you like. I'm a big Jane Austen fan that you probably wouldn't know looking at me, but
believe it.
Yeah. So these are the things that are important. It's like you can get home, you can get that immediate kind of fix on the thing you've just been inspired by. You've watched a show on Netflix, or you've watched a game on the internet. For instance, the most interesting thing for me in Stranger Things is not the fact that they're playing D&D, is that I can go and actually play as the kids in Stranger Things doing the same things using 7DSystem. I couldn't do that with D&D.
Very well put. Actually, oh man, now that you mentioned talking about it as a physics engine, I only learned the term game system kind of recently. Yeah. Before that was just, oh yeah, it's lava. But now that you're talking about like, oh yeah, you play whatever you want in the 7DSystem, I can be like, yeah, that's what you can do with lava too. You can play whatever you'd like as lava. In fact, what was it? One of the greatest compliments I ever got was when I was playing what I do for a new player. They said to me, this game, Enclave, and what you do with it is kind of like what my friends and I did to Dungeons and Dragons to make it what we want. And I was like, wow, first of all, thank you. And second of all, maybe I'm onto something here. And it sounds like you're onto something too. And like, I don't know if you got that feeling too, that it was kind of like a way to let people get what they wanted out of something they loved or something like that.
Yeah, you only need to learn one system to play anything you like. And it's not like you then have to go and rewrite a whole bunch of rules. 7DSystem, it's like the only rules you may need to do is things like if you go into a special world with different weapons and you want to completely redesign the way the weapons work, then you would need to do a short list of weapons, right? And we're talking you could do it in 5 minutes. It's really not like you're not having to do tons of research and all this kind of thing. The mechanics of it remain the same. If you want to play dragons that are going up against villagers, you can do it. You don't need to change the rules in any way, shape, or form. If you want to play rats in a maze, you can do that. You don't need to change the rules in any way, shape, or form. If you want to play a Jane Austen novel, you can. You won't be doing combat. You'll just the rest of the rules. But if you wanted to, you could have a sword fight or a musket battle or something. It'd be a bit of out of place in a Jane Austen setting.
Pistols at dawn.
That's right. But you can, it's. I would not be afraid. Like, one of the games I played with Cody from Taking 20, he played in one with Wylock and Mini Terrain Domain. And I said to them, what's your favorite movies? And so we had 3 different types of movies in there, and I just merged them together. So we had Blade Runner, we had one of them was a courtroom drama, like A Few Angry Men, I think it is. And the other one was I'm trying to remember what the other ones. But anyway, that became this like dystopian Blade Runner-ish city set as a courtroom drama.
Nice.
I didn't modify the rules at all. It was the same rules as I play all the fantasy things with dwarves and elves. Same rules. So it wasn't like when I was doing the live stream and they were asking me rules questions. And again, they hadn't played the game 15 minutes before we started streaming. That's when they were introduced to it. They looked at the character sheets for the first time. It was like, this is how you fill in the dots and blah blah blah, and this is how you roll the dice. Bang, and we started playing. And you can watch that game because it was streamed live. It's 3.5, 4 hours long, and you can see exactly. They just took to it like ducks in water. It's, that's what's key to me, is that they don't have to read the rules. One person needs to know the rules in order to educate and tell them what they need to roll and that kind of thing. But as I've got patrons, one guy's running a Star Wars campaign with his coworkers, and he didn't have to do any rule modifications other than just basic. What does a lightsaber do? Things like that's all he had to come up with, which of course, when you're creating something like that, that's what you'd have to come up with. But ultimately, it's a sword that cuts really well. So, you're just going to take sword and, 5 minutes before and you're done. And that's really the only kind of rule modification that there would be. And the force is just you using the energy mechanic, and you can use the psionics mechanics as well. That would you can comfortably blend those two together, and it will work. And I have no problem with it. Any kind of thing that people can think of, there's a very good chance that 7DSystem would be able to do that. And I think Enclave sounds like the kind of system where if you sat down and said, we want to play Mission Impossible. Well, you're kind of there already with the word mission, but you'd be able to do it, and that I think is important because people. Let's play a game. D&D, you've got to sit for an hour and a half drawing up characters, whereas 7DSystem is kind of like, right, here's the character sheet. This is how big you are. Fill in your name, and right now you start. And away you go. There's no rolling for stats and picking backgrounds, and you pick archetypes, but I mean there's 12 to choose from, and they're story-driven archetypes. So they're the 12 archetypes that are always in every story. So
perfect.
You kind of already know, I want to be a superhero, I want to be like a political kind of character, or I want to be a lover, or you kind of already have that in your mind as to what you want, and so it's easy to kind of just choose. And so
if I may say, by the way, if you're ever looking for a playtester, I would love to play the 7DSystem. Just to throw it out there in case you ever find yourself.
I do. This is not to say that you should become a patron, but I do run patron games as well. But I'm happy to invite you. I'm always open. If people want to play, people should just contact me. I always set up the game 10 minutes beforehand, so it's not like I'm going to put in hours of things. I've got 40,000 stories sitting in my head that I'll just pick one and go. And if you watch my videos, you know that you always start in some kind of peril.
Yep, I love that.
Things are exploding. Bottles are hitting your head. You're falling into traps. The one they were buried, and the guy's like fighting because he's choking on the soil, and he.
Have you seen the meme where it, like a record scratch, it freezes? Yup, that's me. You may be asking yourself how I got here.
That's right.
So, of course, patrons first. That goes without saying. But I just thought I might as well throw it out there, because the more I hear about it, the more I'm like, I got to do this. But and same too in reverse. If you'd ever like to try Enclave or just try my lava system in general, I would love to share it with you, because similar to what you said, I have a zillion stories in my head that I wanna get out there. Because as I've been doing Enclave for a while, I have a log where I record every mission I've ever hosted, and at my last count, I think I've hosted something like 400 missions. And
Yeah.
every single one of them, I look back, and obviously you get some ones that did, like, weren't as good, like you messed up here or there, and you're like, whatever. You got some that are solid gold, but the
Yeah.
majority of them, and I'm sure you've had this experience too, you look back and you're like, that was good, that was
Yeah.
solid. And that's what I think, that's the best thing you can go for, is having consistent, that was solid.
Yeah.
I'm happy to have done that.
Well, do you have any kind of website or anything yet, or?
So as of now, I have an extremely primitive and outdated website that I made, like, that I last updated like 2 years ago.
Okay.
Probably should get that checked out.
But is there
However,
a way for people to contact you if they wanted to play, like test game, or if you're starting a YouTube channel and you want people to actually, like come and play on your channel to showcase the game, how would they get a hold of you?
absolutely. Thank you very much for reminding me. Um, is email kosher? Because I have a Discord as well, but
Okay,
just wanted to double
that's fine.
check. So my Discord is Robby Lava, ROBBYLAVA, one word, and then the number is 5691. Let me double check so I don't mess that up. 5691. Excellent. And in addition to that, my email is robbyworks80092 at gmail.com. I might as well write it down while I have a
Yeah.
whiteboard right here, because I would love to have people trying out Enclave, and I'm honestly very heartened to hear you speaking so positively about making videos, because I've been really wanting to for a long time, but really not knowing how to start, is I guess the way I would put it. Because I like not only showing
The best place to
gameplay, but
start is
also
at the beginning.
the wise man once said. My email is, oh shoot, I think that might be reversed. Well,
No, no, it's
it's
right. It was coming
it's
through
good.
fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic. It's robbyworks80092 at gmail. ROBBYWORKS 80092.
At gmail.com.
Fantastic. Oh shoot, what was I saying? So yeah, I've wanted to do videos of gameplay and talking over basic concepts of the game and doing like spotlights of different parts of the game. And hey, if I get people who really like are like into it, I was thinking about maybe doing a thing where if someone sent me a character they had created or a mission they had hosted, then I
Yeah.
would like take a moment to like show it off and go over what I liked about it. And just I keep having these great ideas, and I guess one of my biggest issues is my technology barrier. I don't really know a lot about it, but I do know how to make a PowerPoint, I've spent a lot of time on YouTube, and I know that that can be sufficient.
Well, you've got what you need right now, a camera and a microphone and a laptop to stream it from to YouTube. So you're 90% of the way there. Um,
Brilliant.
Maybe an extra light.
Yeah, my lighting isn't great right now. It's making me look
But
like a boiled lobster, but
ultimately, with 7D System, you can see the background that I film in, right? My other channels, DMG Info, I record in this background, right? Because it's me. There are other channels that I do where I don't record in backgrounds like this. It's done for a very specific reason, and that's to show that it's a guy sort of like hand making it. It's just a guy in his room kind of coming up with this thing, right?
nice.
I can
If
I
it, if,
I'm perfectly capable of creating like super polished content.
I'm sure you are. I just have
But
this little corner with like my banner that I made for
oh yeah, well,
Enclave.
yeah, again, you're 96% of the way there. You just turn the camera
Ooh,
around. That should have been in the
1%
background the
at
whole
a
time. So yeah, what I would do, your best thing is to get out an Excel spreadsheet, create, say, one video a week or two videos a week, depending on how long it takes you to create a video. If you can do one a day, but again, whatever you feel is comfortable for you to do it. Map out a whole year, a full year, so you know exactly what you're going to be doing for a full year. Shoot at least 10 before you start and upload them one at a time and at the preset dates that what you're doing. Then you can plan out when you're doing releasing, when you're going to release. If you want to release right from the beginning, you can. Obviously, with 7DSystem, I'm building up to a release. My problem with 7DSystem is one of consistency. I don't put out content consistently, which doesn't allow for a lot of traction on YouTube. The YouTubers who get the best following are the ones that are consistent. If you go a full year every week, same time, the video comes out and you get decent engagement, quality content, you will grow. There's no doubt about it. You will grow, and you will grow as far or even further than what I've done. So, I wouldn't judge what you're doing based on what other people are doing. Don't go, oh, well, this guy's got 100,000 or this guy's got 2,500 subscribers or whatever. You do your own thing. You build your own audience, because that's who you are and that's the product you're putting out. People must like you and people must like your product, irrespective of what else is in the market. You can refer to other things in the market, as obviously I'm doing right here, which to me is just furthering the discussion of why it is that we do these things. But building a channel is a separate thing to the game entirely, but it's very important that it's community oriented and community based. When I put out a video, I know who's going to watch in the first day. They're going to comment. I know who they are. Like, I know that I'm going to get comments from these people. I know I'll get emails from certain people. I know who these people are. You know who your core audience are. And that's how you build it up. And then once you get going and you're a couple of hundred subscribers or whatever, then you start to get to channels like me and bigger channels, Nerdarchy, people like that. They are happy to collaborate with people who are trying to build something. They've been at 0 subscribers. They know what it's like at 0 subscribers. They know what it takes to build subscribers, and they're more than happy to help people, build up what they're doing. Precisely why I do this. YouTubers are people, the best YouTubers are the ones who are willing to help other YouTubers, who are willing to grow their own audience, creating content that the audience, like, you are part of my audience, right? You are someone who watches my channel. You engage with my channel. You wouldn't have sent me an email if you weren't someone who hadn't watched at least 20 videos of mine. I would assume you've probably seen more. You don't kind of send me an email or word the way that you did without having seen it. So I know that you've engaged with my content. I know kind of what I'm getting into by talking to you. And so when you've got 10, 20 videos under your belt, and you've got, a few hundred subscribers, and you're approaching other channels, they can get a sense of who you are and what you talk about and why you're doing, and they will be very open. Those that aren't, you don't want to be with them anyway. They're just not going to help you anyway. They're probably going to, stick to their own sort of lane, and they see other YouTubers as competition. That's like saying Star Trek is a competition with Star Wars. Most people will watch both.
Yeah, that's like, a good point.
Not people go, I only watch Star Wars because I will never watch Star Trek. There are people who will be like that, but they're very small. If you like Star Wars, you probably like Star Trek.
And those who haven't seen The Next Generation.
That's right. And those who haven't seen X have not, and that's how it goes. That's what it's all about. You've got to build a community, build relationships with people. The traffic will come. The basic things of the keywords and titles and thumbnails and whatever. That is important, but not as important as building the community around. You look at Hanker and Fernell again from Runehammer. Runehammer was built not on keywords and thumbnails. It was built on high quality content. A little bit off with the consistency in terms of putting out content, but in the beginning for him it wasn't really about being consistent. It was about just putting out cool content, right?
Sure. And I love his painting his live streams. Those are amazing. In fact, my fiance, who really isn't into the whole tabletop gaming thing, loves watching his live streams because she's just entranced by his painting. But pardon the interruption. Carry on.
That's the thing, is offer value beyond the scope of what it is, because you'll draw some people. Like, for instance, there are a lot of people who watch my DMG info channel purely because they want to watch someone build something. They're never going to build it themselves, I've received messages. I love what you do. I like watching your channel, even though I'm never going to build anything. There's the humor, or the cats, or there's some element to it that they enjoy. Then people say, well, I became my wife watches your channel because I was watching, and then she got in. She just likes listening to the stupid things that I say, and that is part of it. Taking it beyond the scope of what it actually is also important. And that's just down to high quality content, and not quality in terms of great camera work and great lighting and great sound. You don't need great lighting. You don't need great video thing. You do need good sound. So if people can't hear you, it's not going to.
Yeah. I do have a mic, fortunately, like a mic. So I'll get around to setting that up.
People always ask me, what camera should I buy? I say, what microphone do you have? Because you can buy a camera for $20, but this is probably $250. Hopefully it is recording on this one and not the other one, which is usually the mistake that I make.
I hear you very clearly. So.
Yeah. So, well, you're hearing me through the camera mic. I'm recording the stream to this one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Anyway, well, thank you very much for reaching out. It was a very interesting hearing about Enclave and all that sort of thing, and I urge people to check you out in future when you are building things and creating a channel and all that kind of stuff, if that's the route you want to go. And I hope it's going to be really, really good.
Absolutely. Gareth, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun talking to you, actually, and honestly very uplifting. I'm like, you talking about YouTube made me be like, yeah, I want to do that. So I think I'm going to give it a try. And I think I'm going to, because the main thing that I know is going to be an instinct is going to be like, well, it's hard and I'm barely getting any, I got 1 view, so might as well give up. And I think that when I get over that mentality, I think I'll be able to produce something that hopefully people find interest in, and I can't wait to show you some of what I end up doing.
Well, I'm your first subscriber, so we can do. Once you got a channel up and running, we can do future collaborations, and I'll play Enclave, you can play 7DSystem, and we got a way to do it. So
I'd like nothing more. That sounds wonderful.
Happy to do it. Well, thank you everyone for watching. I know it's been more than an hour, so thank you for sticking with us to the end. All right.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone out there, and subscribe to this awesome dude. He's willing to talk to a complete nobody and give him some great advice and have an awesome conversation. And I can't give any higher recommendation than that.
Thanks. And with that, I will now end.